touched on some other things. Let's get an update from the Athletic Jayson Stark, who obviously covers it as close as anybody in the country. Jason, welcome. How are you?
Mike, I am doing well. How about you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you. All right, tell me, where are we right now? Where are the negotiations? Where are all these crazy safety, requirements? Where are we?
Okay, well, we've got two different negotiations going on. All right, the first is over health and safety. You're referring to the 67-page proposal that Major League Baseball made to the players over the weekend, detailing all kinds of specifics of precautions that need to be taken. The union has been going through that proposal, is expected to respond. There, believe it or not, Mike, even after 67 pages, there are a number of other questions that
I'm sure
the union feels need to be answered. So that,
I'm sure.
Okay, that's step one. Then the other part of this is obviously the economics. There's been a general discussion of economics, but the Major League Baseball never did make a formal proposal, never proposed that 50-50 revenue split that everybody was talking about last week. So that part still needs to get taken care of.
All right, number one, Jason, is there any, in ownership, is there any percentage of owners who want to cash in on the season, or does everybody want to play?
Oh, everybody wants to play.
Okay.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So there's nobody who wants to close the door?
Well, look, a lot depends on what
the proposal is. What are we looking at? What are you figuring? It's 40% of the revenue, 45% of the revenue? What do we think we're looking at that they're trying to salvage?
You really need to consult an accountant on that part, because a lot depends on how you're defining revenue, right? But I can tell you this: there are a number of smaller revenue teams that have told me, if the players don't grant further concessions on salaries, then they don't want to play.
Right.
Because
one said to me, I don't want to lose $150,000 a week.
Well, whatever the number is,
right.
I mean, you understand? They're saying we don't want a situation where it's all cost and no revenue.
Right.
Now, you understand also that the union doesn't buy that or accept that. So, that's a major point of contention. The union actually thinks there's a chance that Major League Baseball can make a profit playing with zero fans this year. So that's how far apart they are.
And plus, they go on the premise, as you've heard Boris opine, hey, we're not there sharing when they turn around and make $400 million profit over a period of 2 years. We don't get extra money when that happens. So if they have a rough year, that's part of their business. Their franchise goes up every year in appreciation. They're not going to make money every year as a business. So there's good and bad. As one, I think it was Boris, it might have been someone else who said they want to basically privatize the profits and socialize the losses. And if I were a player, I'd understand the premise of that.
Yeah, this is a Boris theory, and on a lot of levels, there's truth in that. Okay, now owners have a much longer period of time to make up for losses than any players do. That's a fact.
No question.
But here's the way Major League Baseball responds to that. This is about cash flow. If there is zero cash coming in, then there is no cash flow, and there's no ability to maintain your business. You have to let employees go, and there are multiple ramifications for that on players beyond this year, right? I mean, think about Mookie Betts going out of the free agent market next winter. You think he's going to get $400 million coming off a season like this?
No chance.
Especially if they don't play?
No chance. The ramifications are going to be felt for years. I mean, I totally agree with that. So there's so many different things that there are so many ramifications that play into it. But, the other thing is also, when you look at it from a standpoint, is everyone has to understand, and this is the one thing that none of them do, is sometimes it's about good faith to people, where what is good faith to your employer? What is good faith to the country? What is good faith to the business? So, like the players, to me, they owe good faith to their employers, just like the owners owe good faith to the country and to the fans. And, sometimes you got to take a hit. This year, as an example, many broadcasters, maybe you, everybody at FAN, they came to us and asked us all to take a pay cut. We did, because we understood the premise that, hey, they're hurting will help when they're hurting. Players have to do that sometimes. Owners have to do that sometimes. It's not always the gravy train.
Well, the union would say to that, we've already agreed to prorate our salaries, right? So we're giving back half of our salaries anyway. That's how they would respond. But your point has not really come into play yet. The idea of further sacrifice has not been agreed upon.
Right.
But I just want you to roll this forward a week and a half or 2 weeks, because then we'll be getting close to June. And if they're going to start spring training 2.0 in the first week of June, this has to get agreed on in 2 weeks? I want you to imagine the public pressure then.
Enormous.
Enormous.
Enormous. And they're looking at a PR disaster, the likes of which they have never, ever understood. It will be so much worse than last time. They'll have no idea.
This is certainly comparable to canceling the World Series in 1994, but that didn't happen in the middle of a pandemic.
No, this is worse,
right?
Because everyone has been asked to sacrifice in some way here. Even in those days, I wasn't asked that year when baseball didn't play to take a pay cut. I've been asked this time to take a pay cut. Everybody's been asked to take a pay cut. Everybody's been hurt this time, no matter what, and they have a public service. They do perform. They are part of the fabric of the country. They do play a role, and they have to recognize that. If they don't, they're short-sighted. You see, to me, there has to come a point where they understand, hey, we do have a special job, and we get to play a special game, and we do have a special role in America, and we have to fulfill that role. We have a responsibility sometimes, and if they are short-sighted on that, I think they missed a great opportunity, and I think they'll pay for it for a long time. I really do. Now, I don't know what it takes for them to make a deal. I really don't. You're closer than that than I am. But I just think sometimes you have to realize that the problem is bigger than you. And in this case, the problem's bigger than they are.
And again, I think in a week and a half or 2 weeks, we'll be in that atmosphere where everybody recognizes that not making a deal because of a money fight at a time like this is a disastrous, potentially suicidal decision, right? Outcome. And so the idea is, how do they find that middle ground? Because it doesn't exist right now. Recognize that they just made an agreement, 7 weeks ago, and now they can't even agree on what they agreed on.
It's typical, isn't it? Now, let me ask you this. We're talking with Jayson Stark of The Athletic, who covers baseball and does it as well as anybody around. Now, from a standpoint of the health stuff, do you see any major obstacles there, or are they both just trying to dot the I's and cross the T's, and they're both on the same page? Or is there anything that is a point of contention in the health part?
Well, there are major unanswered questions. Even after 67 pages of incredible detail, there are many questions that still have to be answered. Hey, there are portions of that proposal where it says we're going to figure this out later.
Well, to me, the biggest one is what would close them down again. That's what I want to know. Right. That's the first one. What constitutes a stoppage in play that we have a problem? It's obviously not one. But is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 10? Exactly what is it?
Yeah, this is obviously the most important area. They've said if a player tests positive, Rob Manfred said this on CNN. If a player tests positive, their plan right now is not to shut down,
right?
To isolate that player and then play on. But there are lots of questions that go beyond that. You just asked one of them. What happens if 5 players test positive? What happens if the Mets' whole starting rotation test positive?
Bingo.
Okay?
Or the stars start falling in the sport. The 3 or 4 of the big stars start falling.
Yeah, and do you want to be in a situation where you're making this decision based on how good the player testing positive is at playing baseball, that's a really bad look.
And I think the other thing is, and this is a big problem, and I think they all know this because I had this conversation with an owner the other day, and I said, here's the biggest one. If any of you guys come back in any sport and one of your biggest stars in the hospital, it's over. It's over. I mean, it would be. Can you imagine you're in the NBA and LeBron James is in the hospital fighting this virus and he's in the hospital? I mean, so if something like that happened, I don't think any of these sports would be back in action.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about that, but that's obviously a real-life scenario that everybody would have to deal with as humans.
Yes,
not just as a sport.
Yeah, or if a breakout happens in some city they want to go into, or they are on such unstable ground. All of them. When I read that, when I read through the just the bullet points of the 67-page thing, I actually said, I don't know if they're going to be able to come back. This is so hard. It's more difficult than I even thought it was. It really is hard to put these sports on under these conditions.
It is, and you can make a case that baseball of all of them is the easiest, quote unquote, to put on, right?
Right.
'Cause it's not based on players crashing into each other. But when you start going through all the details, every player would do what he needed to do to play, right, and follow the instructions as best he can. But just recognize it's not just players. We're talking about thousands of other people, right? Everybody who's allowed in the park, every hotel worker, every bus driver, every TSA screener, everybody has to follow every protocol every single day, or this thing breaks down. And that's where it gets a little challenging, huh?
Oh,
Everybody,
incredibly.
thousands of people doing everything perfect every day for months at a time.
We're talking with the Athletic Jayson Stark about baseball returning. Let me throw a couple of things out. Just tell me if it's been settled or still to be decided. As far is it a 50-man roster? Is that settled?
We don't know what the active roster would be.
I mean, no, but is it 50 men? 50
to,
players will be on with each team?
50 players would go to spring training.
Okay.
Then they will decide how many would be on an active roster.
Do you think there will be a taxi squad?
There has to be.
Okay.
There won't be a minor league
and there'll
season.
be a lot of pitches involved, obviously.
Would have to be.
Right. So what do you think a team looks like?
I think we're looking at an active roster initially of about 30 players.
Okay.
Because you're not going to want to push your pitchers.
And you'll have a taxi squad of pitches.
And you'll have 20 additional players
that you'll be able to run in and out.
Or just for whatever reason. You can't call anybody up from AAA because there is no AAA.
What about service time?
Service time has been decided.
It has already? Okay.
Basically, everybody would get full service time under almost any circumstance.
What happens to what is your gut feeling teams are going to do with their star player who they wanted to have at least spend a month or two in AAA this year? Does that guy automatically come to the majors this year? Because you don't want to sit him around? Because you don't want to sit him around?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And that could depend on how they're going to compute the service time of players like that. If all service time is prorated, I would think some of those players would still spend some time in the minor leagues, but that guy, that star pitching prospect who you were thinking, I can only push him to 90 innings this year, all of a sudden that's not a big deal. So you don't have to worry about any of that. It's just free agent qualification.
How quickly does he get to the free agent day? As far as teams and their approach to this, do you see teams that are marginal approaching it differently than they would have approached the regular season? Do they look at this as an opportunity, or do they look at it the same way?
Well, if you've seen some of these simulations that have been run on sites like Baseball Prospectus and Fangraphs, they would tell you that there is a much greater chance of a fluke team making a 14-team playoff field than you would have in our full season.
Right, like a White Sox or somebody like that. Yeah, somebody could get hot somebody can get hot for half a season.
Yeah, the simulation I saw, over an 82 game season, every single team made the playoffs at least once out of like a 1,000 simulations, except for the Tigers.
Do you think pitching will be ahead of where it normally is, or do you think hitting will be ahead?
I think in a shortened spring training, I don't see how pitchers have time to get as ready as they would normally be, unless some of these teams have already started to anticipate when spring training would start and have players already ramping up what they're doing.
Now, what do you think? What do you think that the union wants? I mean, they obviously know that they're looking at a revenue stream of $4 billion that's gone. I mean, when you're talking about gate receipts and secondary and tertiary concessions and parking and everything else, that's $4 billion in baseball. That's a lot of money. That's gone. We don't even know what else is gone, whether it's signage gone, how much of the radio and TV rights is gone. We don't even know about all of it. They're obviously going to save a bunch of it as much as they can. Maybe they save 40% of revenues, maybe 50. Who knows? I've seen different calculations. They obviously don't want the word salary cap. We understand that. But what do you think they're looking for? What do you think they feel is something they can live with?
Well, they're going to have to come off this stand that we've already agreed on this.
Yeah, that can't happen.
Talk.
Yeah, that can't happen.
And I think that what has to happen is that Major League Baseball has to reframe the concept of what it was intending to lay out last week, because that won't even kick off a conversation.
Right.
But if you think about the concept makes sense. All right. You've got an agreement. I think that. Well, I guess I shouldn't even assume this. The league is saying our revenues obviously are not going to be the same that they would be in a normal season, and we don't know yet what they'll be. We have a union saying we're not convinced you'd lose money by playing under any circumstance. So what the concept is, baseball's saying we don't know what our revenues are going to be, so why don't we just count them all up at some point, and we'll give you half of it.
Right.
Like that's if you're talking about
sounds reasonable.
I keep saying, Mike, if you were a Martian and you'd never spent time on this planet, you'd say, "Boy, that's fair."
It does sound reasonable, yes.
If you know that these two sides and their history,
it's fighting words.
It's fighting words.
Right.
So there may be some way to reframe the concept without having to try to prove what's revenue and what isn't. There's not time to do that. But the concept is.
Do you think the players are looking for something more fixed, where they got some certain guarantees?
I think there's going to have to be a formula, and how you define it, I don't know. But I don't see a negotiation where the players agree to give back another X percent of their salary. I think you have to figure out a way to tie it to something else. I don't know what.
All right, let's talk about the combatants for a second. How big are these negotiations for Manfred and Tony Clark?
Just think of what's at stake.
Yeah, these are big. Their whole reputations, and their reputations too.
How will the public react if it all falls apart?
They'll go crazy.
How will the president react?
Crazy. And not only that, baseball will take a harder hit than any other sport, because baseball is different than every other sport. So, because if everybody could have one sport, and I even wrote this, and I got a call from a football owner and said to me, "Why would you make that statement?" And I said, "Listen, because it's true. Every sport plays a role. Baseball plays a different role. That's the way this country works. Baseball is different. At a time of crisis, baseball's part of our fabric. It's part of our heartbeat. It just is. That's what baseball's role is. We need baseball back more than we need any other sport back. That's the fact."
That's what it's always been. That's what baseball's
it's
always
the fact.
done.
That's the role baseball plays.
It's that, as you said, it's that day-to-day heartbeat that the other sports just can't provide.
No, it just has always been that way. That's been baseball's role in life. That's their role.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if it's different if the NBA comes back at the same time and the NBA playoffs are going on every night at the same time baseball would be attempting to come back. The circumstances could easily be different this year because everything is different this year. But it is really important for this sport to play.
Very important.
For that reason and every reason.
Very important, but more important to the country than the other sports, because that's the role baseball plays. There's a sense of normality to our summers, to this time of year if we have baseball. Baseball will. I've had so many people say to me, "You know when I'll feel like we're back a little bit when I can watch and hear a baseball game," and that's what they think this time of year. Doesn't matter if they're the biggest fans or not. Baseball is a constant. It's woven into our fabric, and you know what? Those guys have to understand that's their responsibility in this. They can't shirk it because that's who they are.
Right. Baseball is summer. Baseball is
That's
an
it.
integral part of all of our summer.
No question.
And, I do think that there is an understanding of that. Everybody feels it who plays it. Everybody feels it who works in it. I do think that takes over to some extent. And I also think there is a mutual resolve to play. Everyone is incredibly motivated to find a way to play. But, Mike, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Money always gets in the way
Of everything.
Of reason.
Of everything. Hey, listen, these are very greedy businessmen and very wealthy businessmen, as we know, millionaires and billionaires. That's what they are.
Yeah, but this is one of those times when that can't happen.
It can't. It can't. If they can't lose sight of that, and there's got to be someone in ownership and someone on the player side who both understand that. Is there a consensus maker in the owners? Is there one guy who can reach across and be that guy who can make that difference?
I've thought about this a lot. This is not the time of Rob Manfred and Michael Weiner perfecting the art of baseball deal making. We wouldn't be in this mess, this public mess, if there was a better level of trust.
Right.
And yet, I go back to Rob Manfred on CNN saying talking about how confident he was that they would make a deal. And in the back of his mind, could he allow himself to say that if he wasn't really confident, if he hadn't really had a conversation with Tony Clark or someone at the union that led him to believe that?
You would hope not, but he's also made a couple of really dumb statements already this year. I mean, he's had a couple of ones he needed to take back, including the trophy, which was not very good to begin with. So he's a nice guy. I like him, but he's had a couple that he needed to take back this year. So I hope that's not the case. But hey, I think the pressure on them is going to grow. They obviously have the pressure from each of their constituencies, but the pressure on the outside will start to grow dramatically. And the president's going to stick his nose in without any question because he knows public wants it and it's an election year. And that's a good, easy grandstand for him. He's going to take it. So the bottom line is he's going to be, I'll be in the middle of this. And, so there'll be a lot of pressure exerted on both sides. There's no question. And it will get ugly. This time they better understand the climate. I think they do because we all do. So I think they do. But, when you see what Snell did, and I didn't have a problem with what Snell said about his health, he just shouldn't have couched it the way he said it. I mean, he made it about his W-2. He didn't make it about about his health. You
think that was a mistake for him?
Yeah. I don't know him at all, but that's one he'd like to have back.
Yeah, for sure. You can talk about your health concerns.
Yes.
You can't talk about money when there's 30.
No, especially when you're dividing it and then saying, "Hey, and I got to pay taxes on top of that."
Yeah, you talk about that pressure, and I am counting on that pressure. I think the pressure is the key, and I don't think it'll just come from the White House because politicians love to weigh in on sports.
Oh, easy! It's an easy one for them, and right now they're all looking. Hey, it's an election year, and they're all looking for easy wins. Absolutely,
it's like the LA City Council voting
Absolutely.
that Major League Baseball give the Dodgers 2 trophies.
Absolutely,
Okay?
Absolutely,
no lose.
It is. Listen, I know you got to run. Thanks very much. Good luck along the way. I'll be reading. Thanks very much.
Hey, good to talk to you.
Thank you. Be well. Thank you. Jayson Stark, back after this.